Hi guys, it's Maddie, and yeah, today we're going to be talking about the dreaded base to final turn, which I'm sure is a problem for a lot of people or has been in the past. So, according to our discussion board, the base to final turn and accidents therein cause 10% of aviation accidents, which is a lot. And there are a few contributors to this, whether that be most of them are stalls while trying to correct for an overshot turn, or just for a stall because of nervousness, like you pull back and you're already low and slow, or just especially not making that transition of thought from cruise flight to slow flight. So for me, this was actually a huge issue during my private pilot. I did not make the transition most of the time until on the final from cruise flight to slow flight. So I would get nervous and I would pull back on my stick. And because we were already low and slow and we were in a turn, we got really, really slow. I never once stalled, which would have been really bad. However, I do often think about how many times my instructor had to yell at me to let go of the stick. So that is a problem because, especially with students, it is a difficult transition to adapt from, oh yes, this is how the airplane flies, cruise flight, power for airspeed, pitch for altitude. And then you learn slow flight, and sometimes it's hard to apply that to flight itself. So suddenly you have to switch over to power is for altitude and pitch is for airspeed. And this is very important, especially in that base to final turn. So to correct that, you have to make that switch. So whether that goes in your checklist or whether that's just something that you audibly say, that can definitely help. It helped me, of course. Also, when you make that turn, to put a little power and make sure to put the nose down just a little bit. Now, in order to make sure that you have the altitude to do this, you have to make sure that you are at pattern altitude when you start your descent and that you haven't made an egregious descent since then. So that's the only issue there. But if you're making a regular pattern, you should be fine. So that's how I did it. I don't know if that will work for all aircraft, but that's how I solved that problem. So for most people, for most of these accidents, there are two main things that have to do with overcorrecting that cause these accidents, and those are accelerated stalls and cross-controlled stalls. So an accelerated stall is kind of what I was talking about with you have your bank, so your turn into the base to final, and then back pressure because you haven't transitioned to the slow flight, so you try to pull up to make sure you don't lose that altitude, but you don't change your power setting because that transition hasn't happened yet. And this combined creates a stall because when you turn, your angle of attack increases, and so your stall speed increases. So you can be going at the exact same airspeed, pull back in a turn, and eventually you will stall, which is a problem when you're, 500 feet from the ground. So another almost more dangerous one is the cross-controlled stall. So if you overshoot the runway, sometimes you will make it a really excessive bank, but also keep opposite rudder so you don't overshoot it again, and you can end up in an incipient spin, which is also a huge problem, when you're 500 feet from the ground. There is no coming out of that one unless it is a miracle from God, and even still, you should not be doing that. So for overcorrecting, make sure if you do end up overshooting, which I've done a million times, I'm sure everybody else has as well, is to make gradual changes and do not cross control the airplane ever at all, because that will screw with your chances and you can, go down because of that. So you don't want to do that. Just make easy, controlled corrections until you get aligned with this in a center line. If you can't do any of these things, go around. You can always go around. Nobody will ever fault you for going around, and it is always acceptable. So thank you guys. I will talk to you guys later. Bye.